everyone, welcome to the ABM Voice Podcast. This is your host Arun Gopalaswamy. I'm delighted you're here. And today I speak with Adam Turinas, CEO and founder of Health Launchpad, marketing consulting firm out of Austin, Texas. So they help health tech firms implement ABM to get better results. Adam's an author, speaker, and a podcaster himself. I'm so excited to spend some time today with him and understand how they go about implementing ABM for their clients. Adam, good morning and welcome to the show.
Hello, hi Aaron. Nice to meet you, and thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Thank you for spending some time with me today. Adam, let's just get started by doing a quick self-introduction. I specifically want you to cover what you've written on LinkedIn, right? So you mentioned that you're a recovering health tech entrepreneur. Talk us through the journey.
Yeah, right. Good.
What is that you're
Um,
recovering from?
oh, yeah. Yeah, PTSD is going to kick in. So, just a little bit of background about me. I spent actually about 20 something years in marketing, mostly working for agencies, and a lot of that B2B in technology, but nothing in healthcare.
Mhm.
Not even pharma and not even life sciences. But in about 2012, I was doing some independent consulting. We had this sort of interesting kind of model for communications, helping companies improve the way that they communicate, particularly, sort of internal communications and communications with partners. And a friend of mine is a physician, and he said, the relationship between doctors and the hospitals is broken, and they're dependent on each other. But because of the changes that were happening in the American healthcare system,
Mhm.
it was creating a lot of disruption in the way that these two parties operated together. And so so he said, well, why don't we go take your model, your communications model, and then see if it works in healthcare? And so we went and did that. And we were pretty successful actually in getting several hospitals to adopt it. Um, and about 6 months into this, we said, I wonder if there's an app for this. And we started to think about what a really good communications application could look like in healthcare. And we then took that idea and we pitched it to one of our clients who was the CEO of a hospital in New Jersey. And he said, you build that, I'll buy it. And so we went and engaged some developers and we developed an MVP, minimum viable product. We tested it with some of his doctors and they loved it. They said, this is, we're really frustrated with so much of the technology we have to use, but we love this. And so that then became the sort of the spark that then started a 7-year journey as a healthcare software engineer. Bear in mind, I had no experience in healthcare at all. In fact, when I realized we walked into our first hospital customer, we went into the hospital, I hadn't been in a hospital for about 20 years at that point, which is the last time I'd been in was when my son was born. So I had
Well,
no idea. I mean, and it is like a parallel universe. The
hmm.
dynamics, the economics are completely different. The titles are different. The issues are different, and language is completely different. And it was a very steep learning curve for me. But thankfully, my physician business partner helped me navigate the healthcare market, and I helped him navigate the business market. And between the two of us, we were, I think, kind of a functioning unit. And so we had a pretty successful run selling the application into about 25 healthcare systems across the
Hmm.
United States. And 25 healthcare systems means, 60, 70 hospitals, probably about 50,000 clinicians, doctors
Well,
and nurses on the application at its height. And then, we raised money, we had partners, we even absorbed another company and changed the name. It became known as Unify Health. And eventually we kind of got to the point where we either needed to get a massive injection of capital, like another 20, $30 million to be competitive, or we needed to sell the company. And so as a board, we decided, hey, we're selling the company. And so the company put up for sale and we hired an investment banker and they did a pretty good job and they found us a buyer. And now the company, the assets of the company, the software, which is still out there, it's still being used by many of our former customers, is owned by a company called Harris Health. But you
Hmm.
know, I will tell you that. So the reason why costs are recovering is that it is not something I would do in a hurry again. You know, I love starting up companies. I've started 6 companies, but when I started the next company, you know, I said to myself, I want to do a services company because I don't want to raise money again, and I don't want
Hmm.
to have pressure of investors on your back. And you know, I want something which is sort of has a, from a cash flow standpoint, is easier to manage than a software company. And that's why I got back into my first love, which is marketing. But the point about ABM is that, you know, one of the toughest things for me was that as somebody, as a long-standing marketer, I find it incredibly hard to market to the healthcare market. You know, as I said, you know, the buyers are very different. Sales cycles are incredibly long and slow. And the number of people who are involved in the whole process, the buyer collective, is much bigger than it is in many other markets. And so, you know, I felt that the purpose behind, you know, I wanted to create a company with a purpose, and the purpose was to help solve that problem, which is making it easier, or at least
Hmm.
helping, you know, companies that are struggling to sell to healthcare organizations develop a more effective way of selling to them. And so that was the idea behind Health Launchpad.
Awesome. What's the friction point that you mentioned about the doctors and the hospital? So where does it start? Is
Well, a really interesting question. So, you know, traditionally, the US healthcare market has been, it's called physician centric, which is the physicians, you know, mostly until relatively recently, like the last couple of decades, were mostly independent. They didn't work for hospitals, they had their
right.
own practices. And the hospitals were dependent on the physicians to bring them the patients. So the physicians actually had a, you know, they have this privileged relationship with the hospitals. In, was about 10, 15 years ago now, you know, the Affordable Care Act
Sure.
came in. And that has changed the relationship because it changes the focus of healthcare to be much more patient centric, to be much more focused on the needs of the patient. And so, and also what happens, so the economic impact of that is that the reimbursements that physicians get have gone
Hmm.
down. And so the physicians were suddenly gone from being these sort of privileged people to being like, well, wait a second, the hospitals are actually, maybe, you know, they still value us, but not as much as they value the patients. And the other thing is, the other change that happened is that they were getting less money. And so suddenly there's this sort of massive friction. And part of what happened was that hospitals then started acquiring the physician practices. And so you end up with this kind of messy situation of physicians who work for the hospitals who are even more disgruntled than the physicians who had independent practices, and everybody was complaining about not making enough money. And so there's a lot of tension
I
in the
understand.
healthcare industry, and frankly, it's still there. I just think it's, you know, it's moved on a bit since then.
So when you go and then implement ABM for hospitals, are the doctors are they one
No,
of the
we don't.
influencers?
No, so when we implement ABM not for hospitals. We implement ABM for healthcare technology companies selling to hospitals.
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
so
Okay.
what
Got it.
we so you know the what we're doing is we're helping them figure out, you know, out of the 6,000 hospitals in the US,
Hmm.
or, you know, 1,000 or so payers, insurance companies, which ones are in market for what they sell.
Hmm.
So, for example, if they're selling a piece of technology which helps them engage patients more successfully, so improve the communication and the way that they manage patients through the process.
Right.
What we'll do is say, okay, of all of the hospitals out there, out of the 6,000 US hospitals or 1,500 healthcare systems, here are the 300 that seem to be in market for what you do.
Hmm.
Then so then the next step is then, okay, who's involved in the buying decision? So probably the chief nursing officer is taking the lead because it's about patient engagement. possibly the chief innovation officer. And, the CIO is probably not that involved, might be involved later, but maybe there's a VP of applications who's involved. And then there are a whole group of influencers.
Hmm.
There's probably about a dozen of them. And so we'll help the clients build out, what looks like the buyer collective, and then use that, understand what are their needs, what are the issues that these buyers deal with. So how are they defining their problem? What solution options do they have? And then, what vendors will be in the considered set, and make sure that, figure out how do we position our clients in that considered set. And we'll use that thinking about the accounts, the buyer collective, the buyer journey as the basic foundation of an ABM campaign, a program.
Hmm.
So that
Hmm.
might include, some
Yes.
demand generation, it might include
Yes.
some lead generation as well, using social selling and a lot of content.
So is that, would you say, doing what you do, right? So it's easier to go vertical, right? You've chosen healthcare, right? So
Yeah,
I think this is the first time I'm speaking with somebody who's actually focused on a particular segment or a vertical,
yeah,
right? And how do you see what are the advantages, disadvantages? So I think you talked about how the universe
yeah,
is like very restricted, right? I'm thinking about, right, your clients. I think since you go really deep and you have some information, right? Because you've been engaged and trying to focus on the 6,000 hospital, right? Which is your universe, right?
yeah.
Maybe I'm filling the answers, but why don't you just help me understand
Well,
the.
so it's interesting. So I guess quite maybe if I could just reframe your question is why be a vertical ABM firm, right? Why pick just healthcare?
Hmm.
And I think the reason is that I picked healthcare first and then ABM.
Okay, you're right. Yeah.
I'll tell you a story behind it. Is when I first set out, I thought, well, what do I know? So, well, I know B2B marketing, and I know about hospitals and patients, and I know about selling to healthcare. So I'm going to have an agency which is a B2B agency, and we'll do B2B marketing, and then we'll also do patient marketing, and we'll also do health tech marketing. And this friend of mine said, "What are you talking?" I was like, "You're totally confusing me." And he said, "By the and as far as your own personal expertise is, what you really the only thing I'd hire you for," this friend of mine told you, is your expertise in healthcare and
Hmm.
healthcare technology in particular. So I'd focus on that. So yeah, you're right. So I started with that, and then as I then so we're a health tech started being a health tech B2B agency. As I started that, I then realized that well B2B is actually ABM these days,
Hmm.
and that really my personal experience with my healthcare company had been much more ABM like than sort of traditional B2B, because we didn't have the budgets to do sort of like mass B2B. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and so that's kind of how I ended up here. We're now in the fourth year of operation, and I think we're pretty well established as the healthcare ABM agency.
Hmm.
And so, what we're doing very carefully is thinking about how we can extend out of healthcare, but without undermining what we're doing. And in fact, what we've done to do this is we've launched a second brand called Total Customer Growth. And that the book, we'll talk about the book in a bit, I'm sure, but
Hmm.
the one of the reasons for writing the book was to give us credibility outside of healthcare. And so the whole idea behind one of the ideas behind Total Customer Growth was to be able to launch a second business called totalcustomergrowth.com, which is not industry specific.
Hmm. So how do you differentiate Health Launchpad, right, from a generic horizontally focused agency or a consulting company? Like what advantage do you bring in? Of course, you have
Well,
experience in running your previous firm, you understand the buyer personas and all of that. But other than that, are there anything that you bring in that a
That's
generic type.
that's it. I mean, but that is something that is that's really important because as a marketer, if you're really stretched, right, sort of chief marketing officer, VP of marketing, marketing directors, they're stretched. They don't have the time to teach the agency how to do their job, right? They expect the agency to know how to do the job.
Right.
And it's hard. Healthcare is really hard. It's really hard to understand. And so with our clients, they don't need to teach us healthcare. In fact, in some cases, we've actually had some situations where we've got companies that are, in other industries and have expanded into healthcare, or healthcare is a
Hmm.
part of what they do. And we've actually helped coach the marketing people on healthcare. We've taught them. We've got all kinds of resources to help teach them. And
Hmm.
so, the decision is like, do I want to work with the biggest ABM agency? If I want to work with the biggest ABM agency, it's not us. But if I want to work with an ABM agency that understands healthcare, we're one of a small group. I mean, there are some other big agencies that have a strong healthcare practice,
Sure.
but I don't know whether they've got the depth
Hmm.
of. And I know this firsthand because early on in the life of this company, I did a lot of work as a fractional CMO. And as a fractional CMO, we actually hired an agency, an inbound agency, with a fantastic reputation. And they said they had some healthcare experience. And we were so frustrated working with them, we fired them within 90 days. In fact,
Hmm.
we made the decision within 30 days that we realized within 30 days we'd made a terrible mistake. And it wasn't just that I had to teach them healthcare. It was just when you teach it, they didn't take it seriously. It's like they just didn't get the difference, the nuances. And I found that incredibly frustrating. And in fact, one of the reasons why I went from doing fractional CMO work, which is what I was doing in the first year, to building an agency was just like, I couldn't find an agency that would suit our needs, frankly.
Hmm. Interesting. So early in the conversation, you talked about how you identify in-market accounts, right, for your clients, customers.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing it?
Well, it's all about buying signals, right?
Right.
So, I mean, the first step is trying to apply discipline in account selection. And to be honest, a lot of companies don't have much discipline, right? They just say
Sure.
they pick the largest accounts, or they just go, we're going for the complete market and we'll segment them based on size. So, the first question we'll ask is there a way to identify what a best fit customer looks like for you? So that's kind of the first filter. Then when we're specifically looking for in-market accounts, we'll use different sources of data. So intent data but there are three types of intent data: first party, second party, third party. First party is data that happens on your channels.
Right.
So on your website, and there are tools that you can put in place to identify some of the accounts that are hitting the website, whether they register for an event, for example. That's first party intent data, or engage with you through social media. So that's one bucket. Second party intent data is things like G2 and Capterra, where they will, specifically people come to those websites to do comparison shopping. And so that's a fantastic intent signal, particularly for mid to lower funnel. And then there's this whole wonderful world of third party intent data. And just for anybody who's not familiar with it, there are different ways of gathering intent data, but
Right.
essentially what intent data companies do is that they aggregate buying signals across the internet and then organize them in a way which helps you identify who might be in market specifically for what you do. So, there's the leading companies are companies like Bombora, and Zoom Info has very good intent data these days. And then there's Intentive from Netline and there are and then a lot of big media companies now have their own intent data. So that whole area is exploding. I will say one thing, which is none of it is perfect.
Right.
it is not. It feels like magic because it tells you who's in market, but it's not perfect, and it can be deceptive. So, for example, with one of our clients, we switched on intent data with their SDRs, and in the first week, they identified an in-market prospect and got into an RFP process that they didn't even know about within a week. And so
Hmm.
that was like magic.
Right.
It isn't. That doesn't happen every day.
That's
However,
right.
what we do find is that we work with other SDRs. We'll show them. We'll provide them with lists of like, look, here are the in-market accounts, and we are seeing a better conversion rate with those accounts than just purely cold accounts.
Hmm.
The way I would characterize it is it's a bit like card counting at blackjack.
Hmm.
If you're familiar with that notion, which is it's not. I'm not a gambler, and I know how to play blackjack, but I don't play it. But I'm familiar with the notion of card counting, which is you sit there long enough at the table that you can start to work out the odds of what card's going to come up.
Right.
And so it doesn't mean you're going to win every hand, but you're going to win over the course of a night. You're going to win more hands, and that's
Hmm.
what I think the value of intent data is. It improves your odds of conversion. It's not perfect.
Hmm. But in general, for fintech, because your clients are targeting hospitals, right? So
Right.
hospitals, maybe in some cases, visit doctors, for example, right? And some of these audiences are not really digitally present, right? And I think there are industries like pharmaceuticals. I don't know where healthcare fits in, right? Are the intent data,
Works
especially the
fine.
third-party
It's
intent, right? So does it work
Yeah,
reliably
they
well?
are. Yeah. So first of all, we're not targeting doctors.
You're not. Okay.
No, we're not,
Hmm.
because when they're not typically the buyers. The only doctors we might be targeting are the chief medical officers or
Right.
the sort of or the clinician execs. And what we're and the mindset that we are targeting in them is not a physician mindset; it's a business mindset.
Sure.
And so they are on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is we find is quite effective. The really bizarre thing is that you can see on LinkedIn who is engaging most with the ads, and we get the highest engagement rate with chief nursing officers,
Hmm. Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and so they are there.
They are what? Administrators? Chief nursing
Yes,
officers?
yeah.
Oh,
Chief
okay.
nursing. So they are they are nurses who have become basically they are the department heads for nursing.
Hmm.
Um, but they are they're clinically trained and came up through the nursing ranks, and so they are present, and if they are involved in a buyer collective in the committee, right, the buyer group,
Yeah.
they will be out searching and researching, and so you can get them across all of these different channels. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
couldn't say whether it works better in other markets than it does in healthcare, but we find that it is effective in healthcare.
That's good. That's good to hear. And the in terms of let's say you acquire a health tech client, right? So what's the process that you follow? And I think you just talked about
Okay.
helping them acquiring the best fit account to start with, right? So
Yeah.
essentially a small part which is in-market account, and then maybe another set of buckets where you also help in demand gen, right? So talk us through the process in terms of how
Got
you
it.
approach.
Okay. So, we have a process, we call it the ABM playbook, and it's a systematic process. It's done collaboratively with our clients. And so, we'll start off by doing, level setting and goal setting. What
Hmm.
does success look like, in the next 90 days? What does success look like in the next 365 days? What does success look like in 3 years? That kind of way of setting, so at least you can understand it's like what are the goals that they're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
And then we'll go through a segmentation analysis with them, and it starts out with the analytical, right? So it's understanding which segments of the healthcare market they want to go after. And one of the things is that, we've got a lot of data on this. In fact, if you if you Google healthcare provider segmentation, we're the
Hmm.
number one search link that comes up because we've written a lot of content on this, and particularly a white paper, which I think is the only one of its kind that segments the provider, actually the healthcare market in a way which is really helpful for marketers. And so they might say, you know what, we're only interested in the hospital market. And then it's like, well, which hospital market, which size? Because, there's a big difference between a small rural hospital in the middle of Idaho and, a large healthcare organization based in New York City. Massively different. And so what we'll do is then go through this segmentation exercise with them. And quite often, particularly for companies early stage, we go for what we call the Goldilocks hospitals. They're not too big, they're not too small. They tend to be sort of regional healthcare systems, and they're actively buying, and they've got big enough budgets to be able to buy large systems, but they're not so huge that the sales cycles are going to be short, relatively short. And relatively short in healthcare means 9 months. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the sort of, that's the initial stage of how we go through the segmentation. And then, the next step is then, so who's involved in the buyer group? So we have a whole system for identifying the buyer collective. And what we're looking for is what we call the maniac with a mission. So who's the person who's like a change agent within the organization, who's going to be most responsive to the marketing and is going to initiate the process of getting our clients engaged to at least an initial conversation. And that's, quite often that is the champion, right? It's the champion. But there are other folks, right? So there's the decision makers. There may be an economic buyer. There may be, a key influencer who's really a decision maker. There's multiple influencers. So we map all that out. That's the next, that stage, call it stage 3, right? 1 is goals, 2 is buyer segmentation, and 3 is the buyer collective. Now, stage 4 is where it gets really interesting, because this is where we build out a buyer journey. And we have a very detailed methodology around that. And the way that we think about, traditional marketing methodology is awareness, interest, AIDA, decision, action, which is fine. It's tried and true, but it reflects us as marketers. It doesn't reflect how buyers buy.
That's right.
So we think about this in terms of the way that buyers buy. So the way that buyers buy is, step 1 is, we've got a problem. We need to think about the problem and we need to define the problem. Step 2 is defining the solution. And that's the interesting thing is that that's actually where they have the biggest problem. They're not, by the way, at that stage, they're not looking at vendors. They're thinking about, should we go outside? Should we build it in-house? Should we do it through partnerships? Can we just use our existing technology? Which is actually usually where they start with, right? And then step 3 is vendor evaluation. And then step 4 is decisioning. And around each one of those steps, we go through and think about what are the key issues that they have at each grade? What are the questions that they have? What are the triggers that start a process? We use, and if a client will let us do it, we'll go out and do customer research on that. So we'll interview their customers. We'll interview prospective customers. We'll use lots of different types of third-party data to inform that buyer journey. So that's actually, it's like the heaviest lifting in the whole project is on developing the buyer journey. Once you've got the buyer journey, the rest is built off that foundation. So the content strategy addresses the buyer journey. So you have content which is designed to help them with problem definitions, content which is designed to help them solution definition, vendor selection content, decisioning content, and then a tactical framework underneath that to get that content in front of the buyers at the right stage. So that might include, LinkedIn advertising. It might use programmatic. It might include arming the SDRs so that they have the right content to use at the different stages of the buyer's journey. And so, again, everything is informed by the buyer journey.
Excellent. It's quite elaborate. I'm wondering, so your sales cycles, right? So for your clients is typically, you said, starting with 9 months. I'm assuming it could easily be double, right? So how do you keep a prospect engaged? So content for sure, right? But in terms of day-to-day workings, right? So how granular, let's say the mapping document or planning that you talked about, how granular does it get? And what are the different channels through which you engage? Do you run like
Yeah.
physical events and things like that?
Oh, everything. I mean, it's
Hmm.
so once you've got a buyer, an account identified as being engaged in market and engaged. So, by the way, we also, that part of this is once we're running the campaigns, is how we actually
Right.
measure measure the effectiveness of it, and frankly, more importantly, track accounts as they move through the process. And so, that means that early on you're identifying the accounts that seem to be more engaged and the accounts that you're able to get leads with, and
Hmm.
then how are they qualified. And so when you get to that sort of stage where you're nurturing a relationship, at that point, to be honest with you, we're more we're more moved into less of the driver mode and more in the sort of backseat mode of supporting the salespeople.
Hmm.
So, if for example, and there are things that you can do, right? So, for example, if you know that you've got a big event coming up, a big trade show, and you're going to have a booth there and maybe a sponsor, what can you do with the accounts that are seen to be most engaged but haven't yet got it become a clear and identified opportunity? How do you get them to actually talk to you and schedule meetings at the events? And there are lots of different tactics you can do. So one of the things that we're starting to experiment with is geotargeting. So, for example, doing programmatic advertising at an event so that the specific targets that you're trying to reach get an offer or a message targeted to them to try and get them
Hmm.
to come and visit you at the event. At least make you aware of why they should do that, right?
Correct. So the traditional ABM tools and platforms, does it work good? If not, like, are there any special consideration or anything that you sort of miss when it comes to
With
tooling?
So the ABM tools, I think the value of them is, so you can do ABM manually, right? You can do it, but it's very hard work and it's really difficult, particularly over long sales cycles, to
Hmm.
kind of keep the continuity. And so the value, I think the value of the intent of the ABM tools is, first of all, you get the intent data comes packaged with it, and you can aggregate the different signals. So it gives you these, they're really good at organizing the different signals around the account. So that's number one. It's very hard to do that manually. And then secondly is that as you run campaigns, you can see the accounts moving through the pipeline, or at least through that, through the buyer journey. You can use the measurement tools to see what was working and what was. So they've got real value in that. And frankly, the marketing automation systems don't do that as well. So there is real value to it. Again, you can do it manually. And in fact, when I had my own company and we were doing ABM, frankly, without realizing we were doing
Hmm.
ABM, we didn't have any much of the way of tools,
Correct.
and it was working okay. It's very, very hard to scale without one of those platforms.
Understood. So at what point do you start introducing an SDR into the buying process? Is it very linear, or do you start getting involved
Yeah,
initially, or when?
I love this question. I think that the analogy I use is a very American analogy. Is like the SDRs and ABM is like peanut butter and jelly. Like they go
Hmm.
together. So think about another way to think about the buying motion is, marketing is initially warming up and identifying in market and engaged accounts and who the buyer collective is. At that point, it's then a conversation with the SDRs to say, don't know if these guys are ready yet, but these guys seem to be high intent topics. So you might want to start by doing a bit of social outreach, looking at them on LinkedIn and figuring out how you're going to engage with them, liking their posts, commenting on their posts, following them, initially. Maybe stand
Hmm.
off. Don't be in too much of a hurry. But
Right.
then also, working with them to figure out what are the sorts of things that we can do to get them to put their hand up, to
Hmm.
raise their hands. And
Hmm.
then it's kind of frankly, it's up to the SDRs to figure out what the right timing is to actually do the outreach.
Hmm. Hmm. How do they
It's a,
decide? So is it just very
you know what,
intuition driven, or?
it's hard actually. It's a lot of it's intuitive. But I tell you, it's interesting thing we found is when the SDRs are using intent data, SDRs are working off multiple lists. And if
Right.
everything hopefully is in their CRM, what we found is that when they've got an intent list, they start the day with the intent list because they know that
Hmm.
those are where they've got the highest odds. What we do with them is then train them on, so part of it is routine. And so one of the things that we insist with clients is that, if we're going to work with you on this ABM program, we must have at least one weekly meeting with the SDRs to talk about what are we seeing, who's in market, who's responding, what can we do to help you, what tools do you need, what nurture sequences are helpful to you. Um,
Hmm.
and so, that fostering that collaboration. In fact, I think the onus is on marketing to be quite assertive in making that collaboration happen.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, what exactly gets discussed there, right? So how do you help? Do you help them with content? Do you help them with, I don't know, to make connections? Like, how do you help from the marketing side of things?
Well, there's tactical and the strategic. So on the tactical side, it's what nurture sequences do you need? What content, if you want to try and reach out to them on LinkedIn, is there some content that you could leverage to do that? That's the kind of thing which is tactically helping them with specific accounts. And then there's the more strategic stuff. So, for example, teaching them social selling. So we do quite a lot of coaching on social selling as well, because it's surprising to me how few salespeople really understand how to use LinkedIn.
Hmm. Talk to us about some best practices from the social selling coaching that
Social
you do.
selling, wow, that's a whole 6 other podcasts. I'll tell you what I do myself.
Sure. Yeah.
First of all, your profile needs to be really well thought through. It needs to, the moment of truth is when you send an outreach. It might not even be it may be, could be an email, could be a connection request, maybe it's commenting, that when somebody you're reaching out to checks out your profile, that they see something where, okay, I think I might be able to trust this person, that this
Hmm.
person has something of value for me. And the problem right now on LinkedIn is that it's come to the point where, I turn down 90% of the connection requests I get because it's just somebody who I know is immediately going to try and sell me something I don't need. And it's probably automated. And so you've got to kind of overcome that. And so your profile is incredibly important because people will check out your profile.
Hmm.
So that's step one. And then step two, it's about, how you nurture that relationship. The kind of what a lot of people are doing is using either automated sequences or sort of program sequences that they might send out themselves. They just don't work well. People kind of know that they're in a sequence, and so they don't work as well as they used to. A lot of
Hmm.
what I find is important is that the way that you use content and post that on LinkedIn and share that, and then proactively share it with prospects, that earns the right to have a conversation with them. And
Hmm.
so there's all kinds of different ways of doing that, which is way more than we can cover, I think, just this podcast.
Understood. At what point do you go and then go to this connection that you've established and then said, hey, I have an ask. Do you need the service or like anything that you wanted to make, right? When do you think
Yeah,
that you do?
you've got to kind of figure out the right point to push. You can't wait the whole way through for them to say,
Right.
okay, what do you do? You have to make, so there is some cadence to it. So, I like the some notion of give three things and then make an ask. So
Three
share
things.
three pieces of content and then
Hmm.
ask. The ask
Hmm.
might be, hey, we're running an event on XYZ. Would you like to attend? A lot of
Hmm.
salespeople are doing podcasts now. Would you like to be on my podcast? I think that's going to wear itself out, by the way. But it
Right.
is that's a technique. We're
Hmm.
having a private event at this trade show. I'd love you to attend. Would you be interested? It's got to be a respectful thing. The sort of thing which is sort of like connect, follow, follow, connect, and pitch doesn't work. Doesn't
Hmm.
work. And
Doesn't.
frankly,
Sure.
is I wish it would stop because it's ruining LinkedIn.
Hmm. think it's common sense. I don't know what why is it not common, right? That people
Yeah.
still continue to
Well, I
spam
think
and
I think people are using the same metrics that work with email, which is you send out a million emails, you might get through,
hmm,
you might get 50 responses. And so,
right.
unfortunately, the problem with the problem with automation is that it's just scaling it. And so it's turning LinkedIn is becoming as spammy as email because of that.
Hmm, it is, but it's still one of the effective channels. Nobody
It
knows
is, yeah.
how long
And
it's going to.
unfortunately, it's being ruined. It is being ruined.
Right. Excellent. Adam, this has been like a fascinating last 45 minutes of conversation. Love to keep going, but I think we'll call it a day. So thank you again for taking time and talking to me. So we'll make sure that put all the links that we talked about, right, so people can
Yes,
access.
absolutely.
And if there
Yeah.
is, how can people reach out to you?
Well, first of all, connect to me on LinkedIn. Connect to or follow me. Adam Turinas, Turinas. There's only one of me on LinkedIn. And the company is Health Launchpad. So healthlaunchpad.com. So you can reach out to me there, or you can email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com.
Excellent. And thank you so much. It's wonderful talking to you
Thank you,
today.
Arun. Appreciate it. Have a good one.